Welcome to Inspirational Leadership. I'm your host, Kristen Harcourt, and I'm excited to introduce you to an amazing woman today. And I am going to be speaking with Sara Dean. Sara is a Seattle based keynote speaker, executive coach, business consultant, and trainer to leaders and teams. She supports women in leadership who want to become more courageous in their thoughts, actions, and conversations. From women's empowerment events to corporate training series to long term resiliency and creating custom talent development curriculum, Sara teaches folks how to identify and own their greatest strengths in order to show up and shine in the areas they most want to grow and evolve. She has been leading women through growth and transformation for the last 20 years. When she's not speaking, training, and coaching, she's hosting the Shameless Mom Academy podcast, a top-rated show with over 800 episodes and 6 million downloads. Welcome to the show, Sara.
Thank you for having me. This will be so fun.
I am really looking forward to this conversation. Full disclosure, Sara and I have probably known each other for, I want to say probably 3 years now. We met
I think
through,
it'll be 3
right?
years in September. We're like coming right
Yeah.
up on it.
Yeah, just about 3 years, which has flown by. And we're both in a mastermind group together called Legacy, and just love Sara and what she's all about. And so I know you're all going to really get a lot from what she has to share today. So, Sara, let's start off by your journey has been amazing and so many different ebbs and flows. So, tell us a little bit more around your journey and what got you to this work you're doing in the world.
So I've been an entrepreneur for over 20 years. I started out working in a hospital environment right out of college and didn't love being managed. And I felt like I had a lot of ideas at 22, 23 that the CEO should know about, and the CEO wasn't really prepared for my ideas. So, within a few years, I actually changed careers entirely and opened my own business. And now I've opened and I'm on my fourth business. I sold one of them. Like it's been a really exciting journey. But what really has brought me, what drives my business and what inspires me every day is being able to support women and women in leadership in different ways. That said, I support all kinds of people. Now at this point, I'm often doing work with mixed gender rooms and organizations and teams, but I've worked in all my kind of exclusive coaching or one-on-one coaching. It's been really exclusively with women. And so I started out in the fitness industry 20 years ago, built my own fitness career and business, ended up having my own fitness studio, little gym here in Seattle. I sold that in 2018. So when I was working with women in that capacity, I realized how much energy women put into shrinking their bodies, and how when women are exclusively focused on shrinking their bodies, how much the world misses out on all their other gifts and how they miss out on so much of their power and joy. And after my son was born in 2012, I started just feeling this really significant misalignment in terms of wanting to support women and wanting to help women become strong and powerful, but then also helping them shrink their bodies, and typically helping women who had weight loss goals and, fixations on belly fat and hips and things like that, where I just thought, I don't want to help women shrink their bodies or try to look a perfect certain way that they deem to be perfect. I really want to help women take up space. And so that became the impetus to starting my podcast, the Shameless Mom Academy, and which, as you mentioned, it's been around for about 8 years now. We're just about to release our 900th episode, which is
Wow.
wild to me. And that's been a place where I help women take up space, whether it's me, recording on my own and giving women the support that they need around certain topics, or if it's me bringing in guests and often sharing guests' really unique stories that are commonly untold. That's what we do within the show. And that's launched me into now more speaking, training, and consulting in corporate spaces where women's voices are often silenced and dismissed and diminished. And so I'm doing a lot of work there. But what I find at the end of the day is that I end up in rooms of men and women. And one of the things, and Kristen, I'm sure you can relate, that makes me so excited is when I'm in mixed gender rooms, I am careful to center the needs of women in those spaces because that's usually what I'm hired for. But the men who come into these rooms are so eager to learn, and they're thoughtful and intentional and curious and compassionate. And I am always left just feeling so much gratitude and also hope, because when I started working with mixed gender rooms, I thought, oh, these guys are probably there because they feel like they have to be there. And that just
Mm.
hasn't been the case. And so it's been really, really cool to see men really step into allyship and advocacy for women, and really trying to unravel some of the ways that they've been socialized to recognize like, oh, the ways that men have been socialized can be just as harmful as the ways that women are socialized. And a lot of men are like, can I also please talk about like my feelings and, can I be vulnerable? Like, how do men practice being vulnerable, in ways that women have been socialized to be vulnerable? So that's a very long answer to how we got here.
Oh, I love that. I think it makes so much sense in terms of the foundation you get to bring to it. And I always felt like even the work that you were doing when you were working in the health and wellness space, you were like a trailblazer and taking that even from a different perspective around why people were doing that and that they could shift their mindset around, yes, like what you're saying about really being stronger, but not being about if you have to look a certain way and be a certain size in order to feel fulfillment. And I think you did a great job of that even after you had your child and going through once your body and everything, once you've birthed this amazing baby and it doesn't look the same, but not making that a bad thing. And I think you did such a good job with even that work, being able to help people recognize some of the conditioning and brainwashing around what it's supposed to be, what you're supposed to look like and how you're supposed to be a woman. That's not
Right.
even actually our truth. It's truth that we've been fed.
Yes. Yes. And then sometimes once you recognize that, like you can't unknow it once you know it. And so then that unraveling, I think, can be so exciting. And that's where I end up working with a lot of my coaching clients is like once you realize, oh wait, I don't have to have imposter syndrome. Like the universe tells me that women have imposter syndrome, but I can actually reject that because
Yeah.
that's really just the way I've been socialized. And all of
Yes.
a sudden, like, things really start to open up in new ways, which is very
Yes,
exciting.
exactly. And that's been my experience as well when you were talking about the allyship that because I have worked from the very beginning with both men and women, I have found so often the men that I'm working with who they're just wanting to continue to go from good to great and have been doing a lot of work and inner work on their journey. They want to know, what is that? What does that look like to be an ally? What could I be doing?
Yeah.
Or how am I doing something where I had really positive intent, but it's not actually helping and it's not serving to be able to be a sponsor or do whatever that looks like, to be a voice in the room where maybe those people aren't in the room. One of the things I really want to talk to you about, Sara, is we're both facilitators, certified facilitators for Step Into Your Moxie program. There's different versions and ways you can do this program, but one of the ones that I really love is doing the Speak Up and Influence, and
Mhm.
really creating an amazing environment for some incredible transformation to happen. And so I'm curious on your end, because I know you're doing this with organizations as well. But I think for both of us, there was a reason why we were attracted to this program and the potential of what it can do to create these moments of transformation. So I'm curious on your end, what did you really like when you started to think about Step Into Your Moxie in the program, and what's unique about it?
I'm so glad that you asked, and I think that my answer will be kind of funny to you. Before I got my Step Into Your Moxie certification, I was working with women, helping them to, take up space, helping them get louder with their voice, and recognizing like, oh my gosh, if I use my voice in new ways, I have all this power. And when I learned about Step Into Your Moxie, I was already working with Alexia Vernon, who created Step Into Your Moxie. So we're working together, and she's like, hey, I'm launching this certification. You might want to check it out. And I looked at it and I'm like, I don't know. Like, do you think does this relate to my work? And she was like, it like really relates to your work. So I'm looking through it. I'm like, well, okay, maybe. Like I was just not like really clearly connecting the dots, but I totally trust her and I love what she does. So I was like, well, I mean, I know I'll learn some things no matter what. And then I went into the certification process with you and I was like, oh, this is exactly what I'm already doing, but it's new tools that really, really enhance and up level the experience for helping people step into using their voice in different ways to gain power, to gain visibility, to get into the spaces they want to be, to create or present ideas, to lift others with them. And so it's been this like very magical fit, and now I use it, I feel like, and maybe you've had this experience, I feel like I integrate it into everything. And so sometimes I am doing like a full day that's like just Step Into Your Moxie curriculum, but oftentimes I'm doing other things that are my curriculum I've developed over the years but I always put in an activity or two, often three, step into your Moxie activities, just because it complements the work that I do so beautifully. And it gets people in action and really learning and practicing new skills, which I think is invaluable. So yeah, that's kind of where I started and where it's evolved to at this point.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. I think that's so funny too. Oh, I don't know if this is connected to the
I
work
was
I'm
really not. I was like, I don't know, Lex, are you sure? I was kind of like, did you mean to send me this email? I'm not really sure this is for me.
I love that. That's so funny. Yeah, it was similar to me in that I was doing a lot of work with emotional intelligence, and one of the areas that I kept seeing in terms of what it looks like for a leader to really step up most effectively, most powerfully in their leadership was really integrating both the empathy and compassion with the assertiveness and the accountability, right? Because you
Yeah.
really need both of those. And what I would see is it'd be one end of the spectrum or the other end of the spectrum. There's tons of
Mm.
empathy, tons of compassion, but oh, I'm not going to hold boundaries and I don't want to give that person constructive feedback. And I'm like, well, that's not really serving the individuals. You're not going to help them to grow and reach their potential. But then I saw the other side where it's like, oh, yeah, I'm really comfortable being direct. I'm like, yeah, you're comfortable being direct, but the way you're delivering that messaging is really creating a lot of harm, is not effective.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you had a positive intention, but the impact is not going the way it's supposed to go. So it's funny, I hadn't gotten certified right away, but then it's kind of the universe or the market, it kept on showing up. And one of the things I really like about the program is that I think sometimes, especially when it comes to speaking up and influencing and having presence, there can be so much emphasis on educating, but not
Mm-hmm.
enough emphasis is like, sure, we can show you all the skills, what it looks like to do this. But first of all, what's getting underneath? Like, let's get at the root. What's
Yeah.
preventing you from speaking up in the first place? So really recognizing what those mindset shifts are and what's going on in your body too somatically, because I think there's so much focus on the head and the mind and the thoughts, but also we've got this body that is part
Yeah.
of the process. And one of the things I really liked about the program was, of course, there's the educating and helping people understand, but we don't start there. We start at getting at the foundation of what's preventing you in a very safe space where there's that psychological safety. And then as you work your way through the different exercises designed in such a way that you're not doing the scariest exercise in the first 2 hours, you're going
Mm-hmm.
to work your way up there so that an individual is not just learning about this by hearing about and being educated, but they're experientially. So then it feels like they really get to embody and go on that journey.
Yeah. One of the misnomers of leadership, I think, is that if a leader is filling up space or conveying information that might be new to the people listening, that's really great leadership. And I have definitely conflated my value as a leader with the amount of information I can spoon feed people in any given amount of time over the years. And I've had to really step back in the last handful of years and recognize, like, I can create slides all day long and I can give you information and stats and create all these aha moments where you're like, wow, I never thought of it that way. Or, oh my gosh, I want to write down these like 5 tips to do XYZ. But if we aren't creating space for people to process the information or to practice using new skills, we're missing a huge, huge area or aspect of leadership that allows us to cultivate other leaders and that allows us to empower others. And so I've had to step back, and I will say that this has largely come from watching how introverts lead versus extroverts lead. So I'm an extrovert, so I can fill all the space very easily. When I watch introverts lead, they can thoughtfully give concise, clear information, and then they can sit back, give people time to internalize it, and then open the floor for conversation. And they can sit in quiet, if
Mm,
not silent sometimes, moments while people are processing and wait for people to then play with the content on their own.
mm,
And Alexia is so great at that. And I worked with another coach who actually I hired to be an assistant coach in one of my programs, and she's really gifted at that as well. And I was like, okay, lesson learned. Like, leadership is not just spitting stuff at people so
yeah.
that you can say, I gave them 120 slides in 60 minutes. It's really about holding the space and creating the space so that when they walk away, they have been able to actually integrate something that they can immediately put into use beyond that learning container.
Yeah, I really like the way that you broke that down. I think it's really, really important what you're sharing there, because I think there is this, I mean, we live in this culture right now is more, more, more is better.
Hmm.
And it's actually, and I also had to educate myself around that too. It's like, oh, I want all the 20 slides. It's like, well, actually, maybe we only need the 10. And then we're having more discussion and more opportunity to integrate and create moments of whatever is going to get created in that moment that I can't even predict. And there's space for that to be able to happen, which to me, as you slow it down like that, creates more of that spaciousness, which is sometimes missing from the day to day when people are so much in that doing and action that they
Right.
don't kind of get that opportunity for their nervous system to slow down a little bit and get grounded and centered. And I think as we slow it down and make less material, but more discussion and more conversations and more putting it into practice and playing, even that language of playing and making it
Hmm.
fun and allowing yourself to experiment and explore. I've just been blown away, and I'm curious around your experience as well. Whenever I'm delivering these sessions, especially when I can keep it an intimate group, 20 people or under,
Hmm.
the the level of vulnerability and shares and where they go to. And I remember having somebody in one of the sessions, which was a nice group. This is for some high potential women, and there was around 15 people in the group, and it was a 2 day session. And by the end, she said, I just have to say, I've been doing, I've been with this organization for 26 years and I've done so much training. I can't even put into words, like I've never had an experience like that, because of the way she just got to, let go and let her guard down and just go on this journey where, and this is what I love so much about it. It doesn't just transform who they are in their workplaces and how they show up as a leader, but it transforms who they are as a human and how they show up in all parts of their life.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I found that it doesn't take a lot, but if you give people the opportunity to share, demonstrate a little bit of vulnerability, and then connect with one another around that, that experience makes them feel seen, heard, held, and valued in the moment. And then they also want more. I was in a situation, a training environment with a top tech company a few months ago, and because of the volume of people, so the opposite end of your spectrum, when you were like, I like doing groups of 20 or less, which I love that as well. But I'm often on virtual trainings for larger companies doing much larger group calls. And so on this one, I think we had like 500 people on the call.
Yeah.
And the challenge for me, they said in advance, they're like, how are you going to make this engaging for everyone if we open it up, if we have a cap of 1,000 people and we're not going to have the chat on? And everyone's going to be off camera and muted. And it's like,
Up for the
um,
challenge, Sarah.
I was, and I mean, we already had like a signed contract. So I was like, well, how are we going to do this? And so the person who I was working with on creating the programming, um, was like, here's what we have to deal with. Here's what we have to work with. Here's why we can't do it a different way. Um, and like, what are your thoughts? And so we were talking this through, and I knew I could have people be reflective, in their own workspaces. I could
Yeah.
create all these activities for people to be sitting at their desks and doing things and send them handouts in advance and all that, which we did. But then I said, I can't, my discomfort was around not having any chat, but I also understood with 500 to 1,000 people, if we have the chat turned on, like things can just get so distracted so quickly or
Yeah.
go sideways so quickly. So what we decided to do was use the Q&A function
Mm,
on, I believe we were on Google Meet. So we used the Q&A function, and we decided to turn it on and off at very specific times. And I would give a prompt up on a slide, and
yes.
then we would turn it on and we would say in the Q&A, just
Yeah.
put like a word or phrase that, that comes up for you when you see this prompt. So we did this. We did it 4 times over the course of an hour-long session.
Yeah.
And when we looked at the surveys afterwards,
Yeah.
first of all, people said it was the best training they'd ever had for women in years and years and years at this top tech company. So I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so relieved, first of all, that it
Yeah.
worked. And so excited that people found it so valuable. But over and over again, people said the community and the connection is
Mm,
what really jumped out at them. And I thought, community and connection, we didn't have cameras on, we couldn't speak to each other, we didn't have the chat on. The
yeah.
community and connection was really just being able to pop words and phrases into a limited view speaking box and
Mhm.
then see what other people were saying. And
Mm,
that was hugely valuable to them. That was the most valuable part for most of the attendees. And
Yeah.
it made me realize that even if we can do this in tiny, tiny amounts, it is so significant. And I think sometimes we think, oh, like it's too hard to accommodate for that, or oh, I don't want to make people uncomfortable, or oh, that takes extra work or intentionality. But it's really, really the thing that makes the difference. And so if you can do it in that small way and it's that meaningful, then going back to your example where you have a whole 2 days, and at the
Yeah.
end, people are like, oh my gosh, in 26 years, I've never experienced anything like this. It really just goes to show how we can take how antiquated a lot of our learning systems are and how we can take them and make them so much more valuable to the people consuming them and the people who really do want to be in these learning environments that improve and transform their lives.
Yeah, I agree. I've also been in situations like you where it's been large groups, and what does that look like to still be able to engage and have dialogues? And it's always been exactly what you said. And I love that you found a different version to bring the chat. Oh, I felt so much less alone because I was thinking I was the only one that was feeling like this. And then all of a sudden
Yeah.
they see from their colleagues, oh, it's a yes, to be human is to feel the full spectrum of emotions, and these different things that you're experiencing are very normal, and that's okay. And how often as you were speaking earlier, in terms of feeling seen, heard, validated, and like they
Mhm.
matter.
Yeah.
Oh, I do feel seen as I'm sharing that. And I think it also shows a lot that the organization is, whatever version that looks like, is investing them in that, and investing in them in that way, and having these resources available in dialogues and conversations where they can start to, whatever that looks like, right? Sometimes it's
Yeah.
micro learning. There used to be a time where I would say, oh, I don't like the one and done. It has to be this whole long process. But actually, over the years, I've shifted my perspective on that, because I think doing something is better than doing nothing. And sometimes that's
Mhm.
going to have to look like, depending on budgets and multiple different things, sometimes that has to be scaled down versions, but at
Yeah.
least they're taking steps in that direction.
Right, right. And I think sometimes people don't know what they don't know. And
Right.
so oftentimes when I go into an organization, they're like, this is what we need, and here's what we're thinking. And then I say,
Yes.
okay, like, and here's what I have to offer that can, meet you where you're at.
Yes.
But then what I give them is I give them what they're looking for, but
Yes.
I give them so much more than that. It's like my Sarah secret sauce plus some step into your Moxie activities plus like all these different things.
Yes.
And they leave and they're like, we didn't know that's what we needed.
Yeah.
We didn't know that's what we wanted, but that
Yeah.
was the thing. And
Yes.
then they have this, like, they've seen something totally new and different. And now they can identify, okay, we need more of this. And that was
Yes.
just the tip of the iceberg. And I think sometimes it's like when you go on vacation in a new place and you're like, I don't know, I hope it goes okay. And then you get there and you're like, this is the most amazing thing ever.
Yes, yes, more of this, more of this. And yeah, I think that's so great. And I also find sometimes in those conversations, they think they need one thing. And then when you ask a lot more questions and get at the root,
Yeah.
you recognize, no, I think this is what's underneath that in terms of those struggles. And that might be something that we do over time in terms of being able
Hmm.
to build those skills. From your experience, when you start to think about being in corporate and noticing some of the struggles, let's start with let's make this more about what we see more often with women in the workplace, and then we can talk about men. And of course, I know a lot of men on this want to be allies, but also there's a lot of opportunity for them to do work, because again, I work with a lot of male leaders on the emotional intelligence piece. And they always say by the end, like, oh, first of all, they say, oh, my wives are loving the way that I'm communicating more what I'm experiencing in terms of my feelings. And they thought that was never
Yeah.
going to be a possibility. But again, of course, they're not doing it because nobody ever taught them how to do this, right? Like it
Yeah.
wasn't, or there was no permission slip either, right? It was actually,
Hmm.
they didn't have permission because they were told it's not okay to do that.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about the woman first. Like, so what are some of the things that you've seen in terms of barriers, and then through doing this work, where you started to be able to see shifts?
Yeah. It's funny you asked this because I was actually thinking when you were talking about when we were wrapping up the last question we were on, that this is where I wanted to go. So perfect timing. You read my mind. So it's funny to me when we think about obstacles, because when people get on calls, and I'm curious if you have this experience, they will list obstacles as one thing. But then when I start asking questions, to your point, I start hearing other things and other themes. One of the things that comes up with women is I often will say, hey, in my experience, women, almost every woman is struggling with some sort of kind of identity crisis around confidence. Yet none of them are talking about it. And the higher you go, the
Yes.
less they're talking about it. And so
Yes.
oftentimes people will say, leaders who are bringing me in for things, they'll say like, oh, no, like our women don't, that's not a struggle for them. And yet, when
Mhm.
I get women on calls across any industry, across any level in the organization, it takes one person to go first and say, gosh, I don't hear other people talking about this. And I feel kind of embarrassed even saying it because of what I've achieved, but I often struggle with confidence. And every single other person is like, oh my gosh, me too. Like the chat lights up, or if we're in the room, everyone's hands go up. It is across the board a struggle for women struggle with confidence because of the way we've been socialized. And so I think it's really important for leaders on this call, or leaders on this in this who are listening right now, to recognize that if you think that women or people in general are not struggling with confidence, it's because they're not talking about it, not because it's not true.
Yeah.
And women in your organization are struggling with confidence. And other genders in your organization are struggling with confidence as well. So if you have a gender that's less represented in your organization, so that's going to be women, non-binary people, trans people, that's already like it's baked in. They're going to struggle
Yeah.
with confidence.
Yeah.
If you are a male, your lack of confidence exists. It just might be around different things. So you might be really uncomfortable sharing a vulnerable story and feel like, well, does anyone want to like hear me tell a story about my kids over the weekend?
Mm.
Yes, everyone wants the dude who never tells stories about his kids to show up and
Yes.
tell a story about his
Yes.
kids and like
Yes.
be emotional about it, to be like, I was so excited. And then my kid, Jimmy did this at T-ball and it was so cute and
Yeah.
I almost cried. Like
Yeah.
everyone wants to hear that story,
Yes.
but men lack confidence around talking like that. So I think that's the first thing, is that this idea that if we get to a certain level, that lack of confidence no longer exists, or just because we're not saying it out loud that it doesn't exist. It is there and it's everywhere. Um, that's like the biggest one for me. And I think you asked the second part to the question and now I don't remember
Yeah,
what
that's
it
okay.
was.
Let's stay on this and then we'll go to part two. And you kind of
Okay.
went into part two, which is amazing. So you
Okay.
already kind of answered aspects of both. 100%, like to the point where I'll even have people talking about something, a very senior person in a coaching session, and say, I'm just noticing like this is probably so silly. I'm so sorry I'm bringing this up because I'm sure you don't
Yes.
experience it with any other leaders. I always say, just so you know, so this is again your permission slip, and also reinforcing all the leaders that I'm talking to are bringing up the same things that you are bringing up
Yeah.
because it's a safe space and then they feel like they can. So
Mm-hmm.
I 100% support what you're saying. I think there is a misconception
Mm-hmm.
around this sense of confidence because of course they need to be perceived as having the confidence, and it feels like, well, that would be somehow weak if I shared that. So I'm not going to share that I might be having some of those struggles. And my experience across the board with male and female leaders is there's lots of things that they're struggling with. I was laughing as you were saying the one about the kids and the activity on the weekend, because for some of mine it's not even about that, it's about even saying that they have kids. I've had
Yeah.
leaders
Yeah.
who feel like they have to hold that back, and it was amazing. I'm just thinking of one CFO that I worked with where at this point his daughter was probably about 3. People didn't really even know that he had a daughter, and I said, I mean, what would that look like for you to bring a picture to in your office and put up a picture of your daughter in your office, or a picture of you with your daughter?
Mm-hmm.
And that was a courageous and brave moment for him, right? He had learned that he was armoring up, and that's outside of work, and we're outside of work stuff should stay outside of work. And that was a big step for him to be able to do that. So I think that's something that I also noticed, Sarah, is those what might feel vulnerable for each gender might look a little bit different, right? And that's why I also
Yeah.
said, like, meet people where they are. That baby step for you, someone else's baby step might look different. I find the same thing in training as well, right? Everyone's at different places on their journey. What might feel like such a little step to that person could be huge, whereas someone
Mm-hmm.
else might be taking something else in terms of what their growth edge looks like.
Yeah.
The other thing I was noticing in terms of the struggles when it comes to looking at either gender, even when we talk about some of that imposter syndrome, which again, there's lots of different things around that, but that feeling that, oh, I'm going to somehow be found out because I'm not an expert, because I don't know everything. I actually see that with both men and women, where they're feeling
Mm-hmm.
like, but again, if they talk to any of their colleagues are all feeling the same thing as well. Like we're all
Right.
kind of going through our everyday, sometimes feeling inadequate. And I think sometimes there's this misconception that confidence means that we somehow never feel inadequate ever again.
Right. Right. I made a comment in a training probably a year ago around women and perfectionism. And it was on the call. It was all women on the call. I'm just jogging my memory here. So it was all women on the call. And I said something about women, perfectionism. It's a social construct. And I can go on and on about social constructs surrounding women, but
Yes.
perfectionism as a social construct for women specifically is that we always are overproving and always overdoing and overproducing, and at a really high level, so that it's like we're overproducing like A+ work all the time,
Yeah.
like going
Yeah.
above and beyond to always prove ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I said, this is a thing unique to women. And someone in the chat said, actually, I want to just push back on that. My husband really struggles with perfectionism as well. And I was so grateful for that comment. First of all, that someone is like brave enough to like step up to the leader that they've never met to be like, hey, just like raise of hand,
Yeah.
like push back. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you said that. And I had to realize in that moment that I work so predominantly with women in one-on-one environment that I see this really, really play out in like intricate ways when it comes to women. I think that women or that men absolutely experience this, but they experience it in a bit of a different way. And so I think that all genders are always trying to overprove ourselves in different ways. When
Yeah.
men try to overprove, it looks different than when, oftentimes, not always, but
Yeah.
oftentimes looks different than when women try to overprove.
Yeah.
But that root of that insecurity can be the same. And it really goes back to, well, how have you been trained to behave? And then how are you constantly trying to prove that you are doing, the best at performing for the things that you were trained to perform at.
Yeah.
And I think we get really stuck in that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think you're bang on there. When we start to think about social constructs, because you and I are both passionate about social constructs,
Yeah.
and I know we could talk about multiple and many different things and what needs to systemically change. But if I were to give you a magic wand and you were thinking about the
Mm,
workplace, and with that magic wand, you get to be just, okay, now we're going to change this very quickly. What are
yeah.
some of those systemic changes that you would like to see in workplaces to be able to support all humans?
Great question. I think I would say I would love for, and there's a couple ways to look at this, but I would love for the magic wand to create environments where everyone makes space for everyone else to be seen, heard, held, and valued. So what that would look like for anyone who has any identities that carry more power. So for a room full of mostly men, that they're always conscientious in any conversation, like, hey, we need to make sure that the two women who are in this room have a chance to talk and have a chance to say what they think. Or if we have a room that's primarily extroverts, that we are conscientious to say, hey, we have two people in here we haven't heard from yet. When you have a minute and you've processed your thoughts, like, please let us know, like your opinion is really valuable. Or if we only have, one person of a different race or culture, that we're making sure, hey, we really want to hear from you. We know you might have a unique perspective on this, and it's really important that we hear from everyone. And so where in any situation, people are recognizing that someone in this space, because of an identity that they carry, might not have had the same, it might take more courage, or just they might not have spoken up for some reason yet.
Yeah.
And that we're always making sure that we are recognizing that we're making space for all those voices to be heard.
I love that. And what would you say? Of course, training is going to be some of that, but what else would you like to see organizations do to create an environment that's more set up to do that?
Yes. So I think having more built-in structures and systems that create open dialogue where everyone participates on a regular basis.
Mm,
My husband had this in his work during the pandemic. They started these Monday meetings, and it was like, come to this call. I think it was like 30 minutes long. And it was literally like, come and do a check-in on how your weekend was, kind of
right.
thing.
Yeah.
It was, and it's just like they just went around the circle. It
Yeah.
wasn't, hey, we're talking about the top goals this week and metrics and blah, blah, blah. And it was just a chance for people to connect, but they all got to know each other really well in that environment from just doing those consistent check-ins. And I
Yeah.
think when you have that space for dialogue like that, it then opens up dialogue in other spaces, and it creates permission
Yes.
to be more courageous in your communication in other
Yeah.
spaces.
Yeah, I love that because I think that there can be so much focus on bottom line, work, 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 and not recognizing that's why even having a meal with someone can just be create
Yeah.
so much connection because through that trust that gets built, everything else actually gets done more effectively because that foundation is there and creating space to have the humanity in the workplace. One thing that I would like to see more of, to add on, that was just showing up as you were saying that, is I just hear so many conversations lately around mental health and mental well-being, and we want to create an environment where there's access to all of that. And I think sometimes the elephant in the room is some of the mental health challenges that are happening is because what's happening in the workplace in the first place. So if we can also make sure that we're creating realistic expectations and recognizing that we have humans in our workplace that are not robots, and that we are cognizant of that they have lives outside of work as well, and not trying to get as much as you can out of every person. But what does it look like to really create work-life integration and managing expectations around what's realistic for a role? And if somebody's feeling under resources and getting burnt out because there's too much in their role, that's again, it's something I like to see change systemically as well.
Yes. Plus one.
Yes. 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 Sara, I knew that we could talk so much about this, and that I feel like we could do another 3 hours on all of the different things we'd like to have changed. But I always like to give you, my wonderful guests, an opportunity to leave whatever is most front and center for you in terms of a final thought.
My final thought is, I want to invite everyone to recognize the power of their voice and what they can do with that today. And so whether that is speaking up to advocate for yourself or someone else, or speaking up to share an idea, or if it is speaking up to be vulnerable in a new way, or if it's speaking up to center someone else and say, hey, I actually am not going to contribute to this conversation, but I would love to hear from so-and-so. Or I'm going to sit back on this one so that I would love for so-and-so to step up, or for someone who doesn't normally take the lead to have the opportunity to step up. I think when we think about how our voice has power, it gives a whole new level of responsibility, but also a whole new level of opportunity in terms of what we can do with that power to use it to support the greater good, and to really align behind the values that are often hanging on our organizational walls, but not so much in live action all the time.
Yes. Yes.
So yes, that's where I will leave it for today.
I love it. Using those behaviors that are associated with those values, living and breathing them. I love it. Sara, where can people learn more about you?
Yes. So people can find me. I'm at saradean.com. That's Sara, no H. So SaraDean.com. I have my podcast, The Shameless Mom Academy, which there's 1 million episodes. A lot of them are on topics surrounding women in leadership that are not about motherhood. And so I always send people there, regardless of your gender, regardless of your parental status, because there's lots of goodies in there that are helpful for just leadership in general. And I also have another podcast coming out soon, so you can keep an eye out for that. That'll be called Shameless Leadership, and it'll be coming out at some point this summer. And we'll be talking about that and promoting it on the Shameless Mom Academy channel and over on saradean.com as well.
Amazing.
Oh, and LinkedIn.
Yes.
I would love, people come follow me on LinkedIn. Kristen is my LinkedIn superhero. When you remember this, I made this big goal, like, I'm going to get better at LinkedIn. This was 2 years ago. And I was like, okay, what is Kristen doing?
Sara is very active and is doing an amazing job on LinkedIn. She's not giving herself enough credit.
So my LinkedIn is saradean.com/LinkedIn is the special link we have set up for that. So saradean.com/LinkedIn, and just connect with me, follow me, pop a DM over in there. Just let me know that you heard this conversation so that I can engage in a little follow-up conversation with you. I would love that so much.
Nice. And I will include all of those in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here today, Sara.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
So much. Enjoyed it so much. And for everybody, if you enjoyed this episode, please share with others. Thanks so much for your reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And if you would like to develop more confident and emotionally intelligent leaders in your organization, let's connect. I can share more about my one-on-one coaching, transformational keynotes, and ongoing leadership training. From my heart to yours, sending tons of love. Bye-bye.